The phone rang while I was folding laundry. It was my eldest daughter, Claire. She's a heart surgeon, and I'm used to her calling late from the hospital. But that night, her voice shook in a way I had never heard before. "Mom," she whispered, "is Dad home with you right now?" I glanced out the kitchen window. My husband, Richard, was bent over in the garden, his old straw hat pulled low, hands deep in the soil. "Yes," I said, laughing a little. "He's right outside. Why do you ask?" Silence. Then her words hit me like ice water. "Mom, that can't be. He's on my table right now. He just went under anesthesia. I'm looking at him." For a moment, I thought I misheard. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "What are you talking about?" I whispered back. I scanned his fingerprints. "It's Dad, Mom. It's him." My knees buckled. I gripped the counter to keep from falling. My husband in surgery? My husband in the garden? I turned slowly. And that's when I saw it. In the glass of the window, his reflection loomed behind me. Richard stood there, holding a shovel. His face was calm. Too calm. Like he knew I had heard something I was never supposed to know. My breath froze in my chest. My daughter's voice cracked on the line. "Mom, are you there? Answer me!" I couldn't. My throat locked up. My mind was torn between two impossible realities. My husband asleep on an operating table miles away, and my husband standing behind me, inside my home. That night was the beginning of everything unraveling. My marriage, my family, my sanity. Because what followed that phone call was not just the fear of a stranger in my house. It was the unearthing of a secret buried for 40 years. A secret more painful than betrayal itself. They say every family has its skeletons. Mine had one still breathing. So before I tell you what I found out about my husband, let me ask you something. If your own child told you that the person you love most was living a double life, who would you believe them, or your own eyes? If you believe family secrets cut the deepest, then like this video right now, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share with you is the story of how my entire world was ripped apart by a single phone call and the reflection of a man I thought I knew. I used to think my life was ordinary, almost predictable. I was a wife, a mother, and a woman who built her world around her family. My days followed a rhythm I could trust. Morning prayers, the sound of spoons clinking against cups, Richard humming in the garden while he dug through the soil, and the thought of my children scattered across the world chasing their dreams. I told myself it was a life of blessings, even if sometimes it felt too quiet. Richard and I had been married for over 40 years. People envied our steadiness. He was dependable, calm, and always present. Ask anyone who knew him, and they'd tell you, Richard is a man you can count on. He liked simple things, tending to his plants, fixing a squeaky hinge, reading the newspaper from front to back while sipping lukewarm tea. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely argued. He was the kind of man people described as solid. Our children grew up on that foundation. We raised 3. Nathan, my firstborn son, Amanda, my younger daughter, and Grace, my eldest, the heart surgeon. Grace was the one who carried her father's determination but sharpened it into ambition. From the time she was a teenager, she dreamed of being in the operating room. While her friends talked about travel or parties, Grace pored over anatomy books, quizzed herself with flashcards, and shadowed every doctor she could convince to let her watch. I was proud of her. I still am. But being the mother of a future surgeon came with its sacrifices. There were nights I stayed awake ironing her lab coats. Mornings I prepared her breakfast even though she left it untouched, rushing out the door with only coffee. There were days I held her as she cried after exams, whispering that she was enough, that she would make it, even when she doubted herself. Richard rarely joined in those emotional storms. He stayed in the background, steady as ever, tending the soil. He would glance at us through the kitchen window, his hands dirty, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, I wondered if he was proud too. He never said it outright. When Grace finally graduated medical school, I wept openly, clutching her white coat as if it were mine. Richard simply nodded, gave her a firm hug, and went back to the garden. "Plants don't water themselves," he said with a half smile. I told myself that was his way of handling joy. Quietly. Life with Richard was filled with little patterns like that. He was always in the garden. Always. Morning to evening. If he wasn't working on the hedge, he was pruning roses, or turning soil, or sharpening tools. Sometimes I teased him. "You'll bury yourself in that garden one day." I laughed. He only smiled, never answering, as though my words had brushed against something I couldn't see. Looking back, I wonder why I didn't notice more. The nights when he would leave the bed without explanation. The faint dirt under his nails, even when it hadn't rained for weeks. The way he always kept his shed locked, though he claimed it was because of neighborhood kids. At the time, I shrugged it off. A wife learns not to nag. Grace, meanwhile, kept pushing forward. Residency nearly broke her, but she didn't bend. Her hands, once soft from youth, grew firm from holding instruments for hours. Her eyes grew sharp, calculating, focused. She'd call me after surgeries, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and triumph. "Mom, I saved him." His heart was failing, and I fixed it. I would smile through tears, feeling her victories as though they were mine. Nathan, my son, drifted in and out of our lives. He was less present, always busy, always promising to visit but finding excuses. Amanda, his wife, never warmed to me. I told myself not to take it personally. "They're young," Richard said whenever I raised my concerns. "Give them time." Still, the house often felt divided. Richard in the garden, me in the kitchen, my daughters on their paths, and Nathan's silence filling the gaps. I thought the worst thing I faced as a mother was distance. I thought the pain of children growing up in a way was the hardest wound. I didn't know then how wrong I was. The day Grace called me, I was folding laundry. Richard was outside in the garden, as always. The window was open, and I could hear the scrape of his shovel against the earth. Steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The phone rang, and I answered with my usual cheer. "Mom," Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "Is Dad with you right now?" I frowned. "Yes, of course. He's outside, digging in the garden." "Why?" There was silence on the line, broken only by the hum of hospital machines in the background. Then, Grace spoke. Her words so quiet I had to press the phone hard to my ear. "Mom, that's impossible. Dad's on my table right now. He's under anesthesia. I'm about to operate on his heart." My hand went cold. My eyes shot toward the window. Richard was still there. I could see his reflection in the glass. Bent over, a shovel in his grip, his movements deliberate. For the first time in years, I noticed the way he glanced toward me, his eyes catching mine in the glass. And he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. That was the moment I realized my life had never been ordinary. It had only been a curtain. And behind that curtain, something dark had always been watching me. The phone was pressed so tightly against my ear that my hand trembled. Grace's voice was breaking, her words strangled with disbelief. "Mom, I'm looking right at him. Dad is my patient. He's lying on the table in front of me." I felt my chest tighten. My throat dried as I glanced again at the garden. Richard was there. I could see him. The shovel moved up and down in steady rhythm, soil lifting and falling. His back was slightly bent, his shirt clinging with sweat. He was right where he always was. I swallowed hard, my voice rising. "Grace, listen to me. Your father is here. I'm looking at him right now. He's in the garden." The silence that followed was long, heavy, terrifying. I could hear the background in the oar, the faint beep of monitors, the shuffle of nurses, the controlled chaos of a surgery in progress. Then Grace's voice returned, quieter but steady, her training taking over. "Mom, I prepped him myself. I signed off on his chart. His ID band says Richard. His fingerprints matched. I've seen this man's scars." The scar on his abdomen, from when he had his appendix out as a boy. The old stitches on his knee from that football accident in college. I checked everything. "It's him." I froze. My mind raced backward through memories. Richard showing Nathan the thin scar on his knee, joking about how clumsy he had been. Richard rubbing his stomach when it ached, saying, "Old wound, don't worry about it." Grace wasn't making those things up. She knew them because they were true, because she had grown up with them, because she had heard them from her father's own lips. But I could also see him. He was no ghost, no dream. His reflection was still in the window, his shovel still moving. When I blinked, he looked up again, as though he could hear every word my daughter was saying through the thin pane of glass. And he smiled, a small, eerie curve of his lips, as if daring me to say more. My knees nearly gave out. I clutched the counter with my free hand, desperate for balance. "Grace," I whispered, "stop this. You're exhausted. You've been in surgery too long. Maybe you're mistaken." But she cut me off. "I am not mistaken. I'm trained to recognize bodies, vitals, history." "Mom," I opened his chest. "His heart is failing, but it's his, it's Dad's. I would stake my career on this." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I heard fear. Not the fear of losing a patient, but the fear of losing her own father twice. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Richard was still there. He wasn't fading. He wasn't vanishing. He was real. I could hear the crunch of his boots on the soil. He tapped the shovel against the ground. Slow, deliberate, almost like a signal. Almost like he was reminding me, "I'm here. You see me." Two truths clashed inside me, tearing me apart. My daughter, trained, brilliant, standing in an operating room, certain of what she saw. My husband, steady, familiar, standing in the garden, certain of nothing but his silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run outside and shake him, demanding answers. But something in his posture stopped me. The way he didn't break eye contact, the way he lingered with that shovel, as though the earth itself was his ally. "Grace," I said slowly, my voice trembling. "If your father is on your table, then who is this man in my garden?" Her gasp through the line nearly shattered me. "What do you mean, Mom? What are you saying?" I closed my eyes, fighting the rising panic. "I'm saying he's here. He hasn't moved. He's digging, watching me. He knows I'm on the phone. Grace, I swear to you, he's here." She tried to reason with me. "Mom, listen to me. People don't have identical scars, identical fingerprints, identical histories. It's medically impossible. If this man weren't Dad, the system would flag it. I would know." Her voice grew sharper, more insistent, like a doctor cornered by facts. But I couldn't argue anymore. My reality was staring me in the face. And then something happened that froze me more than her words ever could. Richard lifted the shovel, not to dig, but to rest it upright in the ground. Then he raised his other hand slowly, deliberately. His index finger touched his lips. A warning, a command, silence. I staggered back from the window, clutching the phone tighter. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid Grace could hear it through the line. "Mom?" she asked, alarmed. "What's happening? What do you see?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't disobey the silent warning in Richard's eyes. My husband, or the man who looked exactly like him, was telling me without speaking, "Don't you dare." Finally, I forced out a single line. "Grace, finish your surgery. Save the patient." My voice cracked on the last word. Patient. Father. Stranger. Who was he? "Mom," she started, but I ended the call. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I stood there, staring at the glass. Richard turned away as if nothing had happened. The shovel returned to the soil, the rhythm resuming, as if my entire world hadn't just split in two. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind outside. Richard came to bed late, his clothes faintly smelling of earth. He lay beside me, steady breaths filling the room. I didn't dare ask where he had been, or who he truly was. But the question burned inside me, louder than the silence. If my daughter told me something impossible about my husband, should I believe her knowledge or my own eyes? Chapter 3. The Reflection in the Window. When I hung up the phone, I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the window as if the glass itself had become a doorway to another world. My breath fogged the pain, short and uneven, each exhale reminding me that I was still alive, still conscious, still in the middle of something I couldn't name. The reflection didn't waver. He was there. Richard, my husband. The man I had shared breakfasts, arguments, and a bed with for over 3 decades. He stood with his back half-turned, the shovel rising and falling in a rhythm too calm, too deliberate. The soil broke under his hands as though it had been waiting for him. And yet, at the same moment, my daughter was cutting into a chest in a hospital operating room, swearing on her career and her sanity that the body lying open on her table was that same man. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, almost afraid to blink. My mind screamed at me to do something, to move, to shout, to run, but my body betrayed me, glued to the spot. My ears strained for any sound beyond the scratching of shovels against earth. There was nothing. No birds, no cars passing, not even the distant hum of a neighbor's TV. The world seemed to have paused to watch me unravel. The strangest part was his calmness. He didn't rush. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even pretend not to notice me watching. He knew I was there. He wanted me to see him. Every measured strike of the shovel was a performance, an act put on for my eyes alone. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What was he burying? The thought slithered into my mind like a snake, cold and poisonous. What was under that soil? I wanted to believe it was nothing, flowers, weeds, some simple garden project he had put off for too long. But my heart pounded with another truth, one I was too afraid to name. I looked closer. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his forearms tense but steady. There was no sign of strain on his face, no anger, no joy. Only that strange, serene focus, like a man completing a task he had rehearsed 1,000 times. And then it happened again. He paused, leaned the shovel against his shoulder, and turned slightly, enough to let the dim porch light catch his eyes in the glass. He lifted a finger to his lips. Silence. My whole body went cold. I stumbled back from the window, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. I nearly fell, catching myself against the counter. My chest rose and fell in ragged bursts. He wasn't warning me about the neighbors. He wasn't asking me not to wake someone. That gesture was for me, a command, a threat. I couldn't breathe. My mind split in two, one part screaming to fling the door open, to run into the garden, to demand answers right there and then. The other part begged me to keep quiet, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to survive the night, because the truth was unbearable. If Richard was really on that table in the Ore, then who was this man in my garden? The reflection shifted again. This time, he didn't smile. His jaw tightened, his gaze sharp, and for a heartbeat I thought he would come inside. I pressed my back to the wall, holding my breath, waiting for the knob to turn, but it didn't. He went back to digging, as though nothing had passed between us, as though I were a ghost in my own home. I crept to the living room, careful with every step. The floor creaked and I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. I crouched by the edge of the window, peeking through the curtain. He was still there, unshaken, unbothered. The hole was deeper now. My mind supplied images I didn't want, shapes, bodies, secrets buried beneath our very feet. And yet, when I looked at his posture, the ease of his movements, I saw familiarity. This was my husband. The man who fixed the leaky sink, who held my hand at funerals, who read the newspaper every Sunday morning. His body moved with the same rhythm I had known for years. The same way his shoulders rose when he breathed, the same tilt of his head when he worked. If he was an imposter, he wore Richard's skin perfectly. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A message from Grace. "Mom, are you safe? Please text back." I typed a shaky reply. "Yes, I'm home. He's here." Her answer came almost instantly. "That's impossible." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, when I noticed something in the glass again. The reflection. He had stopped digging. He was looking directly at me. The phone slipped slightly in my grip. Had he seen me text? Did he know what I was saying about him? My stomach twisted. Slowly, Carefully, I set the phone face down on the counter, as if that could hide my fear. And then, he smiled. A slow, chilling curve of his mouth. Not playful, not kind. A smile that said, "I know you're trapped." I backed away from the window. My mind screamed at me. Should I confront him now? Demand answers while he stood in the dirt? Or should I lock myself in the bedroom, wait until daylight, and pray this nightmare ended? The silence pressed down on me like a weight. Even my heartbeat seemed too loud, too dangerous. My husband, my Richard, was outside with a shovel. Another Richard, if my daughter was to be believed, was lying unconscious on an operating table. And I stood in between those two realities, lost, trembling, and more alone than I had ever been. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Which one of you is real?" I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside. My husband, or whoever he was, came in from the garden long after midnight. I heard the water running in the bathroom, the soft thump of his clothes landing in the hamper, and then the bed sinking under his weight. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He lay there breathing evenly, like nothing at all had happened. I kept my eyes closed, my body stiff. My heart raced so fast I thought it would wake him. When his breathing deepened into what sounded like sleep, I turned slowly, my gaze falling on the familiar outline of his face. The man beside me looked exactly like Richard. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar on his jaw from a bicycle accident in his teens, even the way his hand curled slightly under his pillow. But the question screamed louder than sleep. If this is Richard, who was lying in that hospital bed under my daughter's scalpel? At dawn, before he stirred, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed into the kitchen. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Grace again. "Mom, I need to know. Was Dad home all night?" I typed back, my hands trembling. "Yes. He was here." "Why?" Her reply came after a pause. "Because the patient coded twice. He's fighting, but it's strange. His blood type doesn't match the one on Dad's medical file. There are old scars on his chest, surgeries I never knew Dad had. It doesn't add up." My legs gave out, and I sank onto the chair. Blood type wrong. Scars unknown. Was this some stranger who only looked like my husband? Or had Richard been living a life I never saw? The sound of footsteps made me lock my phone. He appeared in the doorway, dressed neatly, as if the night before had never happened. His eyes met mine, steady, unreadable. "Coffee?" he asked, like it was any other morning. I forced a nod, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. He poured a cup, slid it toward me, then sat across from me, with that same calm face. Finally, I whispered, "Richard, what were you doing in the garden last night?" His hand froze on the cup. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something. Hesitation. Calculation. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You saw me," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. My chest tightened. I nodded. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Then he said something that chilled me to my core. "I never wanted you to find out this way." My fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Find out what?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "The man on that table isn't me, but he's not a stranger either." My stomach dropped. "Then who is he?" Richard looked me straight in the eye. "My brother." The room tilted around me. My husband never mentioned a brother, not once in 30 years of marriage. I felt the ground shift under my feet, like my whole life had been built on a lie I hadn't even thought to question. "You don't have a brother," I said, my voice sharp, trembling. "I do," he replied. "I did. I should say, I've had him all along. A twin. We were separated when we were young. Different homes, different lives. I buried that part of my past because I wanted it gone. But sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried." My breath caught. A twin. That would explain the identical face, the familiar hands. But why hide something so monumental? "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked. "Because it wasn't safe," he said simply. "He made choices, dangerous ones. I didn't want you or Grace anywhere near it." The words lodged in my chest. Safe. Choices. Dangerous. My mind flooded with every oddity over the years. Strange phone calls he dismissed, unexplained absences, vague answers when I asked about his childhood. Pieces that once seemed unimportant now screamed for attention, but I wasn't ready to let him off so easily. If that man on the table is your brother, then why was Grace so certain he was you? His fingerprints, his scars, everything matched. Richard's eyes hardened. Because we share more than blood. We share almost everything. Identical twins confuse even science. Fingerprints can be eerily close. And as for the scars, he looked away. Some of them might not be his. I froze. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the garden he had been digging in. Some things you've believed about me weren't entirely true. I've borrowed parts of his life before. Medical history, papers, documents, when it was convenient. The room spun. My husband wasn't the man I thought I knew. He wasn't just hiding a brother. He was hiding an entire double life. I whispered, "So which one of you is the real Richard?" He turned back to me slowly, his face a mask I couldn't read. "The one sitting here. The one who chose you. But the man on that table, he's proof that the past doesn't stay dead, and now it's come back to destroy us." Tears blurred my vision. Every part of me wanted to scream, to throw the coffee in his face, to demand the whole truth, but something in his eyes, something cold and unshaken, kept me rooted to the chair. In my pocket, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Grace. "Mom, the strangest thing, this man has a small mark behind his ear, exactly like Dad." I checked Dad's file from the hospital archives. It matches. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like they're the same person. My breath caught. Identical twin? Or double life? The line blurred until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. My husband's words wrapped around me like a noose. He leaned forward, his voice low, final. "Whatever you think you know, you don't. And for your own sake, don't dig deeper." End quote. But how could I not dig, when the man I loved was splitting into two? He held the shovel as though it were an extension of his arm. Its edge was caked with damp earth, and for the first time since the call from my daughter, I noticed how comfortable his hands looked gripping it. Like they had done this before. My voice cracked when I asked, "What are you burying?" He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned on the handle, tilting his head the way he always did when he was about to lecture me about something small, like watering the tomatoes too much or misplacing his tools. Except now, the weight behind his stare was different. "You think you know me," he said slowly, almost tenderly, "but you've only ever known the man I allowed you to see." The ground beneath my feet seemed to tilt. His words didn't sound like a confession. They sounded like a verdict. I forced my face into calmness. "Then tell me who you really are." A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant barking of a dog and the faint rustle of leaves. He set the shovel down beside the garden bed, then wiped his palms on his jeans. For the first time, I noticed how restless his eyes were scanning, calculating, as though every word he chose was a thread holding his world together. "I buried him a long time ago," he murmured. "The boy I used to be, the name I was born with, all of it, it's gone." The words twisted inside me. My daughter's trembling voice replayed in my head. "Mom, I'm staring at his face. It's Dad. It's him." Two men, one on her operating table, heart cut open, one standing in front of me, with soil under his nails. I swallowed hard. "Are you saying there's another you?" His lips curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. "Not another me. A shadow. A twin who never should have lived." I wanted to scream that it was insane, that I would have known if he had a brother, that marriage didn't leave space for secrets this large, but I stayed quiet. Survival instinct told me the truth didn't matter as much as keeping him talking. Because now, I realized, the shovel wasn't just a tool, it was a trap. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I spent my whole life making sure nobody dug up what I buried. Do you understand? Nobody." The way he said it chilled me more than the evening air. His tone was calm, steady, and deliberate. not the voice of a man confessing to his wife, the voice of a man warning her. I nodded, feigning understanding. I won't tell anyone. But inside, my chest burned with betrayal. 20 years of marriage. Every dinner, every smile, every small moment of intimacy, all of it felt like a stage play performed for me while the real story unfolded in the shadows. The man I thought I loved was either a stranger or a liar. Maybe both. He touched my arm, gently, as though testing whether I would recoil. I didn't move. Not yet. You've always been smart, he said. That's why I chose you. But don't be foolish now. Don't go digging where you shouldn't. I forced a trembling smile. I won't. He seemed satisfied. He picked up the shovel again and dragged it back toward the far edge of the garden, where the ground looked freshly turned. The scent of earth carried on the night air, and for the first time, I wondered what exactly was buried there. My hands shook, but my mind was steady. I knew then I had only two choices: confront him and risk the weight of that shovel crashing down on me, or play along, quietly collecting the shards of truth until I could escape with my life. I chose silence, for now, but the silence was heavy. It pressed on my chest, crushed my ribs, and made my skin crawl. Because silence in a marriage wasn't protection anymore. It was war. The night after the shovel incident, I couldn't sleep. My husband's breathing beside me was steady, almost rhythmic, too steady, the kind of breathing a man controlled. I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself it was paranoia, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. At dawn, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my eldest. Mom, we need to talk. Urgent. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and went outside to the back porch. The garden still carried the scars of the shovel's edge. When I answered, her voice was low and strained. Mom, it's worse than I thought. The man on my table yesterday, he isn't dead. We stabilized him, and I accessed his medical records. I froze. And? There are files going back decades, she whispered. Hospital admissions, injuries, surgeries. But none of it matches Dad's life as we know it. Different cities, different names, different employers. But the fingerprints match him perfectly. My chest tightened. You're saying your father has lived more than one life? She hesitated, then said, No, Mom. I'm saying there are two lives. Two men, but they're both dangerous. Her words clawed at me. Explain. The man in surgery, he's not innocent. The scar tissue on his chest, the marks on his arms, he's had procedures consistent with violent injuries. Stabbings, fractures. His body is a map of violence. He's lived a life built on blood, and his records tie him to things I don't think we want to know. My hands went cold. And your father here? She lowered her voice further. He knows. He's been hiding this for years. Either he's been covering for his twin, or he's been living double. But whichever version is standing in that house with you, Mom, don't trust him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My entire marriage collapsed in front of me like a rotten beam under pressure. My husband wasn't simply keeping secrets. He was a walking labyrinth of them. And each path led deeper into danger. Mom, she said urgently, we need to protect each other. He won't expect us to work together. Her words gave me the smallest flicker of strength. My daughter, my flesh, my blood, was risking everything to dig through the lies. And now, she was the only ally I had left. I whispered, Then we keep quiet, we act normal. But we watch him, both of them. And if we find the chance to end this, we take it. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken terror. Then she said, Mom, you need to know one more thing. In the records, there were references to disappearances. People who went missing in towns where they lived. The kind of disappearances no one ever solved. My throat burned. Are you saying one of them is a killer? She didn't answer. The line crackled, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then her voice returned, sharper, trembling. Both, Mom. I think both are. The words tore through me like glass. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. When I turned, he was standing at the porch door, coffee in hand, smiling the way he always did in the mornings. Early call from our daughter? He asked casually. I forced a smile, my heart slamming against my ribs. Yes, she just wanted to check in about her patient. He nodded, sipping slowly. His eyes lingered on me a beat too long. Then he turned toward the garden, the place where secrets lived beneath the soil. I watched his back and realized the truth. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a survivor, trapped between two men who shared the same blood, the same face, and the same capacity for destruction. And my daughter and I, we were the only ones who knew the truth. For now, I had lived in silence long enough. My daughter's discoveries were no longer whispers of doubt. They were a blade pressed against the truth. Every day since her call, I carried the weight of it inside me, pretending to smile, pretending to cook, pretending to be a wife. But my eyes followed him. Every shovel of dirt in the garden, every quiet phone call in the garage, every time he looked at me too long, as if he was measuring how much I knew. I began to write everything down. Dates, times, what he said, what he didn't say. My daughter funneled me documents, hospital records, fingerprints, inconsistencies too sharp to ignore. Together, we built a case. Not for the courts yet, no. This was first for me, for my own justice. The house became a theater of lies. When I laid dinner on the table, I watched his hands. When he smiled at me, I wondered whose smile it was, my husband's or his brother's, or a man so fractured by lies that he had become both. At night, I replayed my daughter's words. Both men are dangerous, but which man was in my house? I knew the only way to find out was to break the silence. The moment came one Sunday evening. He had showered and sat in his armchair, the evening news flickering across his face. He looked ordinary, safe, a man who had shared my bed for 40 years. But I knew now that ordinariness was a mask. I stood in the doorway and said, "We need to talk." He lowered the remote eyebrows raised. "About what?" I held up a file, one my daughter had copied for me. Medical records, dates of surgeries he never told me about, injuries that didn't match the life he claimed to have lived. I watched his eyes narrow, then harden. He didn't reach for the file. He only leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "So she told you." My chest clenched. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, softly, "You don't want that answer." "Yes, I do." My voice broke, but I didn't back down. "I gave my life to you. I carried your child. I built this home with you. And now I find out there are two of you? Or one of you living two lives? Which is it?" His smile was cold, stripped of charm. "Both." My blood ran cold. He rose from the chair, slowly, deliberately, and for a moment I thought he would lunge at me. Instead, he walked to the window and stared into the garden, the place of shovels and silence. "My brother and I were born together," he began. "But only one of us was supposed to survive. He was weak. I was strong. They let him disappear into the system, while I lived the good life. But he didn't die. He made a life of his own, a violent one, and every time he fell, I cleaned up after him. Because if he went down, I went down with him. Same face, same blood." My knees weakened. "You've lied to me for 40 years. I protected you," he snapped, turning suddenly. "Do you think you'd have loved me if you knew the truth? That your husband was tied to a man who kills?" My voice shook. "And what about me? About our daughter? What about the nights you told me you loved me while hiding this? You didn't protect me. You trapped me." His face darkened. For the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. He was no longer husband. He was something else. Something feral. "You should have stayed quiet," he muttered. I reached for my phone in my pocket. The record button was already running. Every word he spoke, every threat, every confession, it was being saved. Not just for me, for the world. "I won't be quiet anymore," I whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. His eyes met mine, burning with the realization that the power had shifted. That night, with my daughter's help, I turned everything over. Records, audio files, decades of proof. Law enforcement didn't hesitate. The news spread like wildfire. A man living double lives. Two faces tied to crimes across states. Families broken by lies. My neighbors looked at me differently. Yes, but with pity, not shame. Because the shame was his, not mine. When they came to take him away, he didn't fight. He only looked at me once, his mouth twisting into something between a smile and a sneer, as if to say, "You've won this round, but the war isn't over." But I didn't care. The weight was finally lifting. That night, I lay in bed alone for the first time in decades. The sheets felt cold, but the silence was clean. No more lies breathing beside me. No more shovels in the garden. No more pretending. I had wanted justice so badly I couldn't sleep. Now, I still couldn't sleep. But for the first time, it was because I was free. When I look back now, I realize that the moment that changed me wasn't the call from the operating room, or even the confession that shattered my marriage. It was that second when I turned and saw his reflection in the window, a shovel in his hand, calm in his face. My fear turned into something else that day. Not strength at first, but survival. And survival grew into strength when the truth finally broke through. I had lived most of my life believing I was safe with him, that his silence in the garden was peace, not secrets, that his long nights away were work, not lies. I never questioned it, because trust was the soil our marriage grew from. But I know now, trust without truth is nothing but sand. It shifts, it sinks, and it buries you if you let it. The cost of those secrets was more than I ever thought I could pay. My family's name was dragged into headlines. My nights became battlegrounds of memories, voices, whispers I once ignored. My daughter, strong as she is, carried her own pain. To see her father not as a steady man in the garden, but as a stranger on her table, bleeding under her hands. And yet, in all the wreckage, she became my anchor. She held me steady when I wanted to collapse. She reminded me that the lies of one man did not erase the love of a mother and child, that even when betrayal scorched everything, something can survive the fire. Sometimes, when the nights are quiet, I still see that reflection. I still hear her trembling voice from the operating room. I still feel the sting of knowing the person I trusted most had been two different people all along. But I am not that frozen woman anymore. Fear has given way to something harder, sharper, a strength I never asked for, but one I had to find. Now, I tell myself this: a secret has power only if you let it live in the dark. Bring it to the light, and even if it hurts, it loses its hold. So I ask you, if the person you trusted most turned out to be two different people, what would you do? Would you turn away, or would you fight to bring the truth into the light? Because I learned the hard way. Silence is protection for them, but speaking out is survival for you. Subscribe now for more powerful stories of betrayal, survival, and revenge. And share your thoughts. Could you ever forgive a secret like this?